Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And today we're looking at something pretty interesting, where fashion, faith, and controversy kind of all collide.
Hmm.
I've been looking over the stuff that you sent me, and it's a wild mix.
Yeah.
You've got social media posts, you've got like official statements, and then activists weighing in as well. And it all comes back to this one event, a fashion show in Gulmarg, Kashmir.
Yeah.
That beautiful area up in the
And it's
Himalayas.
it's a gorgeous area.
Yeah. So that's the part that I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around. Like, how did a fashion show, which, is meant to bring in tourism and showcase, creativity and all that,
Yeah.
how did it cause so much immediate outrage? Yeah. There were all these photos and videos from the show that blew up online.
Mhm.
And tons of people were saying that the models were like semi-nude and the whole thing was just totally disrespectful of the local culture and our religious values.
Yeah. And it's really important to keep in mind that Kashmir has this very unique history and culture. It's a region that's so deeply rooted in Sufi traditions and that really emphasizes introspection and a connection with the divine.
Hmm.
And often that translates to a more conservative social fabric where modesty and how you dress and how you behave is really important.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So I guess if you got a fashion show that features more revealing clothes, it's going to clash with those feelings.
Exactly. And to really get how strongly people felt about this, we need to look at the immediate reactions. Mirwais Umar Farooq, the chief priest of Srinagar's Jama Masjid and a key figure in the Hurriyat conference. He didn't mince words. He called the event outrageous and intolerable, especially because it took place during Ramadan, which is such an important time for spiritual reflection and religious observance.
Yeah, wow. Those words really do make you feel how much offense was taken. Was this like a common reaction, or was that just his personal opinion?
No, it seems like a lot of people felt that way. Even Chief Minister Omar Abdullah, who probably wanted to support the region's tourism industry, he had to acknowledge how upset the public was. He said that the shock and anger were totally understandable and that the images showed a complete disregard for local sensitivities, especially during Ramadan. He immediately called for an investigation.
Wow, so even the political leaders felt they had to address this.
Yeah.
That really shows you how much this issue affected the community.
Absolutely. And then there's Raja Muzaffarbat, who's a social activist, and he took an even stronger stance. He went beyond just being offended and accused the organizers of actually trying to demolish Kashmiri morals and ethics.
Oh, wow, that's a serious claim. He's saying it wasn't just people interpreting fashion or art differently. He thinks it was a deliberate attempt to cause offense.
Exactly. And that's where things get even more complicated, because now you have to look at the question of intent versus impact. Even if the people running the show didn't mean to offend anyone, the consequences were clearly significant.
Okay, so we've got this background of cultural and religious sensitivity in Kashmir. We've got a fashion show that a lot of people thought ignored those sensitivities. And we've got prominent figures expressing outrage, even suggesting there were bad intentions behind it. It seems like all the ingredients for a huge controversy were there.
Yeah, and there's one more piece we can't forget: the role of social media. It was the photos and videos being shared online that really made things explode.
Yeah, social media has a way of making everything bigger, doesn't
It
it?
really does. But here, it's more than just how fast information spreads. Think about the power of visuals. Just a photo of a model in revealing clothes, taken out of context of the whole show, can cause a really strong emotional reaction, especially when it goes against deeply held values.
Right. A picture can be way more provocative than just words on a page. It skips past all the logical thinking and goes straight for your gut feeling.
Exactly. And when those images tap into anxieties people already have about their culture being eroded or outside forces coming in, the reaction can be explosive.
So we've got this potent mix, cultural clashes and religious sensitivities, and then that amplifying effect of social media. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
But was this fashion show intentionally offensive? Or is it more a case of just people interpreting things differently and there being unintended consequences?
Yeah, that's the real question, isn't it? And it makes you think about how complex freedom of expression really is, especially in a place like Kashmir with all its history and diversity.
Because on the one hand, you've got the argument for artistic freedom, the idea that artists should be able to create and show their work without being censored.
Right.
But then on the other hand, you can't ignore the concern that artistic expression shouldn't be intentionally hurting a community's beliefs and values.
Absolutely.
It's like walking a tightrope.
Yeah.
And I imagine in a place like Kashmir with centuries of tradition and these really deeply ingrained social norms, that tightrope gets even thinner.
Exactly. To really understand the nuances here, we should probably dig a little deeper into the history of fashion and how it's been seen in the region.
Okay, yeah, I'm all ears. I have to admit, I don't know a whole lot about Kashmiri history.
Well, for centuries, Kashmiri clothing has reflected this blend of influences, Persian, Central Asian, and of course its own unique heritage.
Hmm.
Traditional attire, especially for women, really emphasizes modesty and grace. The firan, for instance, is this long, loose-fitting robe that's been worn for generations. It's not just about covering the body, but also about embodying a certain cultural aesthetic.
So when you introduce something like a fashion show with clothing that's so different from those norms, it's bound to cause some friction.
Exactly. It's not just the clothes themselves, it's what they represent. Maybe a potential shift in cultural norms, perhaps even a perceived threat to established values.
And that perception gets blown up by social media and becomes the fuel for the outrage we're seeing.
Yeah, and social media adds a whole other layer of complexity because it's not just about that initial reaction. It's about this echo chamber effect where anger and indignation can just bounce around and grow so quickly. All the nuance gets lost in this rush of comments and shares.
Right? It's like everybody's trying to be the most outraged.
And in that rush to judge people, often miss the chance for a real conversation. We end up talking at each other instead of really grappling with the complexity of the issue.
So how do we as informed individuals navigate this? How do we balance our support for artistic freedom with our respect for different cultures? It feels like we're constantly being pulled in different directions.
It's a challenge for sure, but I think it starts with recognizing that there's no easy answer. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's about coming to these situations with an open mind and a willingness to understand the different perspectives.
So instead of jumping to conclusions or getting caught up in the online outrage, we need to step back and ask ourselves, why are people reacting this way?
Exactly. What values or beliefs are driving this reaction? And can we acknowledge those concerns while also defending the principles of artistic expression?
That sounds really hard. It's easy to say, be more understanding, but how do we actually do that?
Well, for one thing, we can try to learn about the cultural context. Like in this case, learning about the history of fashion in Kashmir, how religion shapes social norms, and the specific things that might have made people upset about this particular fashion show.
So instead of just seeing a picture of a model in a revealing outfit, we try to understand why that image might be offensive or disrespectful in that specific culture.
Exactly. And once we have that understanding, we can have better, more productive conversations.
It's about listening with empathy, even if we don't agree with the other person.
And it's about recognizing that being uncomfortable can actually help us grow. It's in those moments when our beliefs are challenged that we have the opportunity to learn and become better.
So it's not about avoiding these tough conversations, but about leaning into them with curiosity and respect.
Precisely. And you never know, through those conversations, we might find ways to bridge the gap to appreciate both the beauty of artistic expression and the importance of being sensitive to other cultures.
It's like we're looking at two totally different worlds, right? Like you've got artistic expression, which is all about pushing boundaries and challenging the status quo.
Mhm.
And then you have a place like Kashmir where tradition and a more conservative way of life are so deeply rooted. I can totally see how those two could clash.
And that clash, I think, shows us a bigger tension that we're dealing with all over the world. It's this friction between globalization, which is connecting us in ways we've never seen before, and holding on to our unique cultural identities.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's like this controversy is just a small example of this much bigger conversation we need to have about how different cultures interact and understand each other, or maybe misunderstand each other.
Exactly. And it really highlights the need for what you might call cultural intelligence. It's not just about knowing that different cultures exist. It's about understanding why people do things differently, why certain values are so important to them, and why something that seems totally fine in one place could be really offensive somewhere else.
So it's not enough to just scratch the surface.
Yeah,
We need to really get to the heart of why cultures are the way they are.
exactly. And that takes effort. It means being willing to step outside of our own cultural bubble and try to see the world through a different lens.
This whole controversy is kind of a warning sign, isn't it? It reminds us that we can't just assume that our way of life, our values, or our art will be accepted or understood by everyone.
Right. And it shows how important humility is. We need to recognize that there are other ways of seeing the world, other values that are just as important and deserve our respect. And I think that kind of humility is crucial, especially in a world that's becoming more and more interconnected.
Wow, there's so much to think about. This deep dive has been really eye-opening. It shows just how complicated these issues can be. It's not about blaming people or saying who's right and who's wrong. It's about understanding the different viewpoints, the historical and cultural context, and hopefully finding ways to move forward with more sensitivity and awareness.
I agree. And as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with this question. In a world that's becoming more and more connected, how can we balance the desire for individual expression with the need for cultural understanding? It's a question that's going to keep challenging us as we navigate this globalized society.
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those brains working.